Hello everybody, we'll be doing chapter 12, the last chapter of Tsotsi by Athol Fugard today. Aiza was having trouble with the rows again. The difficulty lay in trying to keep them straight. The first one had been easy enough, but then it always was. You just followed the fence, and just that was straight. The row ended up straight. It was the second row that did it. Miss Mariette had shown him. Just so much, Aiza. Put your hand down. Yes. That is how far apart they must be. He didn't need to look back now to know that he had gone crooked. The little seedling he just put in was no less than 3 hands away from the corresponding one in the first row. Aiza stole a quick look at the office window. He caught a blur of grey hair, so he pretended to be busy. But she must have seen him. Everything all right, Aiza? Could he pretend not to have heard? Aiza! Old man, white hair, stiff legs, can't hear. He planted away industriously, taking care to measure the spot for every seedling. If she's watching, he thought, she'll see me doing it right. He made a great show of measuring with his hand. He even went back on his tracks to measure those he had just planted, so as to convince the eyes at the window. Aiza almost thought he had succeeded when he heard the door slam and heard light footsteps coming towards him along the gravel path. He immediately thought of the strange black block-heeled laced shoes that she wore, and at which he always stared when she spoke to him. Aiza sighed inwardly and prepared himself. He played it all wrong. He should have answered when she first called. Had he done that, she might have been content with a few words from the window, instead of which, Aiza, I was calling. He waited. Aiza, great pain, suffering pain. She could sound it in a way that he had never heard from anyone else. Aiza, what have you done? If you hadn't got used to the white, powdery face and thin lips, and heard only those words, you would have thought tears were coming. Aiza knew better. He got stiffly to his knees and took a quick look at the face before dropping his eyes. The same complaining little smile was there that he had seen the very first day he saw her. Now, if he took off his cap, scratched his head and looked back along the row, the last 6 or 7 which he had planted with such great show of measuring the right place were correct, but after that there was a sudden bulge that tapered away to the start of the bed. Aiza! The smile was no effort on her part. It was there permanently. She looked at the elderly man with round eyes. Yes, look at what you've done. Now tell me, aren't you a naughty boy? Aiza smiled and looked up at the sky. She amused him sometimes. Yes, she said, a naughty boy. Now I did show you, didn't I? Yes, Miss Mary. His inability to pronounce the last syllable of her name had a strange, disturbing effect on Miss Mariette. 1 hand apart, yes, Miss Mariette. Everyone else can say it, Aiza. Now, about this. Isabel Mariette. turned away and he followed her down the bulge. Good gracious me. Just look at that, will you? What were you thinking of when you did that? There's enough space there for a chrysanthemum, isn't there? Yes. She had her eyes on him all the time. Madam. You'll have to take them out, Aiza. Yes, madam. All of them. Yes. Every one. Yes. She waited. He waited. She played with a necklace of amber stones around her neck. And when she'd finished sighing over the crooked row of seedlings, she looked up and over the fence at a donkey cart passing in the street. Aiza decided again that the white powdery smell of Miss Mary was repellent. Everyone out, measured properly, and then planted again. And her shoes. Where did she get those shoes? And remember, one hand. Her legs were like broomsticks. Well, get to work, you naughty boy. Aiza sat down on his knees, and the laborious job of replanting every one of the seedlings was begun. He worked determinedly, hoping she would be satisfied and go away. More than anything else, he disliked her having watched him work. He could do nothing or something simple, like weeding a garden or planting for hours on end, and not notice the time, because of his memories. But with Miss Mariette standing over him, the seconds crawled past like tortoises, while he waited for the next sigh of regret or the sound of her voice in another gentle complaint. Despite his show of diligence and industry, that is what happened now. Gently with the roots, Aiza. They're delicate little things, and we don't want them to die, do we? Pause. Do we, Aiza? No, madam. Well, if you do it that way, they will. Oh dear! Aiza wiped the sweat off his forehead. What had he done? There you go and do it again. Here, let me show you. This was the worst of all the unpleasant things that could happen when she was around. She was going to show him. She was going to get down on her knees beside him on the earth, touch his hand with her thin, cold fingers and show him. It never worked because he either closed his eyes or turned his head. Once when she had done that, Aiza had accidentally looked down her dress and seen the flat, white breasts with nipples the size of a tikkie. Another time, she had farted. Since then, he'd never liked being in any intimate proximity with her. Are you watching, Aiza? Yes, madam. Now, were you doing it this way? No, madam. To an incredible extent, a peaceful existence was dependent upon knowing just when to say no or yes to the white man. Then why weren't you, and also knowing when to say nothing at all? You know something, Aiza? God. She was now busy with her third. I sometimes think you don't want them to live. She said this solemnly, expecting a violent protest. In the silence that followed, she crawled onto the fourth seedling. Look at this, little fellow. Do you think you could live with all his roots sticking out like that? No, madam. Then why do you do it? Sometimes I think you're just a naughty boy. Using the fence as a support, Miss Mariette at last got her to her feet. There, I've done all your work for you. Her critical desires were satisfied, but she stayed on for a few minutes longer, looking vacantly over his head into the street where the donkey cart was trotting back the way it had come. She had a few more remarks about the Charinthium and gladly, and then with a final reminder that he was planting an unholy ground, because it was church ground, she left Aiza. He had been so exhausted by her presence that he took no more chances. For an hour he worked without a break. At the end of that time the crooked row had been straightened out, and then he went back to where he had left off. A few minutes passed, and then he was out of sight of her window, and could settle down to an uninterrupted reverie on that most provocative of thoughts, the white man. What better example was there of the immense range of experience covered by that one phrase, the white man, than the contrast between his immediate boss, Miss Mariette, and the big boss, the Holy Father Ransom. Heaven and earth it was, if not hell. They had both taught him, or tried to teach him, to do something. Miss Mariette endlessly, painfully, regretfully, to weed the church garden and plant seedlings in a straight row. Father Ransom to ring the bell. It had happened soon after Aiza had got the job as caretaker boy to the church. He was weeding the garden, and Father Ransom, seeing him, had come up to him. "What's your name?" "Aiza." "You're a Christian then?" "Yes, boss." "Father Ransom, Aiza." "Father Ramsey." "That's right." "How would you like to ring the bell, Aiza?" "Me?" "Yes, would you?" "Right. There's a service tonight. Be at the door 10 minutes before 7 o'clock, and I'll show you." That night, 10 minutes before 7. "Pull this rope, Aiza." "Go on." Aiza gave it a tug. Nothing happened. "Harder." He tried again, and the bell pealed out one note. "Do you believe in God, Aiza?" "Yes, Father." "Deeply, I mean, do you believe in God a lot?" "Yes, Father." "Well, Aiza, the ringing of this bell is to call all the other people to believe in God. Remember, some are lazy and don't want to hear. Now try." Ding dong ong ong, ding dong ong ong. That was all there was to teaching and learning how to ring the church bell. But Miss Mariette and her weeds, well, he'd had her this morning again. This way, that way, too much, too little. Naughty boy, why don't you listen? When will you learn? And all the time standing on 2 legs as thin as broomsticks, in those strange black shoes. Aiza first noticed the man at tea time. Miss Mariette had called his name 3 times in a shrill, surprisingly loud voice. So he took his tin around to the office and she filled it with tea for him. There was one tree on the holy church grounds, a crooked blue gum near the big gate for motor cars. And in its shade, Aiza had always drank his tea. He noticed the man because he looked tired. The largest part of Aiza's long life had been spent in hard work, and he knew from personal experience the attitudes and angles of reality, deep exhaustion. When the body can no longer even carry its own weight. He saw it immediately in the way the young man was sitting on the pavement and half leaning against the lamppost, and it reminded him straight away of the terrible time he'd once spent as a labourer on a potato farm. He saw it again, the terrible unspeaking postures of his fellow workers, slumped around the walls of the hut where they were herded at night after 12 hours in the fields. From the memory, Aiza might have wandered off into another reverie and forgotten the man opposite him, were it not for the inconsistency of that man's being tired. He was the Tsotsi type, the no-good loafers of the street corners and shebeens, the ones you avoided at night, the scum who killed for pennies or tickies, or no reason at all, and who never did a day's work in their wicked lives. Yet this one was tired. Aiza didn't even have to put it as a question. It was there before his eyes, a man tired in a way that he had thought beyond even the hardest worker in the city. Aiza knew the warnings. Ignore him. Look the other way. Go about your business as if you have never seen him. But now his old age life had more than ever before become meaningful in terms of what he could recognize or remember, what he knew or what he had been through himself. So sitting under his tree, he swallowed a mouthful of tea, and then sighed and said aloud, "Too much for one man. Shall I throw it away?" He looked at Tsotsi. "Somebody else might like some warm tea. What about you?" The young man sat up and looked at Aiza, who offered him the tin. For a moment it looked as if he was going to refuse the tea. Then he got to his feet and came and sat down beside Aiza. He took the tin with a murmur of thanks and drank. From time to time he looked up and examined the church, seemed to think for a few seconds, and then drink again. The Church of Christ the Dreamer, Aiza preferred. The young man looked at Aiza carefully. He seemed to hesitate about saying something in reply, but finally got it out. "God, that's right. There inside. Inside." The stranger gave Aiza his tin back. There was still some tea left. Aiza hesitated in taking it, but then decided against urging him to finish it all. "I ring the bell. On Saturdays and before evening songs. I ring the bell." Aiza pointed at the square belfry. "You've heard it, haven't you? It's me. Why do you ring it?" Aiza closed his eyes with pleasure. "To call all the other people to believe in God. Some are lazy, you know, and don't want to hear." When he opened his eyes, he was surprised to see the expression on the other man's face. He was visibly fighting against exhaustion, blinking very quickly and hanging on to Aiza's lips as if what they had to say was of profound importance to him. He was about to ask something when Miss Mariette's shrill "Aiza" cut into their silence, and Aiza groaned and looked back at the small white woman. She came up to the two men. "Have you got all the marigolds in, Aiza?" "No, Miss Mary." "Oh." Aiza got to his feet and threw out the dregs of the tea in his tin. "Is this your friend, Aiza?" She didn't wait for a reply. "You know we don't allow strangers in the grounds." She turned to Tsotsi. "What's your name?" He got up and walked out of the gate without even acknowledging her presence. "Who is that man, Aiza?" "I don't know, madam." "Well, please tell him that this is not a park but church grounds, and that he's welcome to pray. In fact, we want him to pray. Come to me when you've got in all the marigolds." She didn't think of anything more to say and went back to her office. Aiza went back to work, and a few seconds later the young man came up to the fence. "Have you been inside?" he asked Aiza. "What do you mean, man?" "I ring the bell. I told you. On Saturdays and on Sundays before the evening songs. Inside, just there, by that door, the rope is hanging there." "What's inside?" "The organ, the music, you know. All the seats and the candles, and Jesus cries on a cross." "Jesus, inside there on the cross." The young man sat down on the pavement, and they continued their conversation through the fence. What's he do? What's he do? Man, he's dead. Dead. They killed. They put him up on the cross and he died. What did he do? His father sent him. Who's that? God. Yes, tell me about God. Why are you asking these things? Why do you look so tired? The young man took his time in replying. He's got something to do with me. Tell me about God, old man. Aiza wiped the sweat off his forehead. He was enjoying himself. God made the world. He made everything. You, me, this street, everything. Go on. Let me see. Once it started raining too much and the water rose high and he feared for everything. So he saved it by putting everything in 7 days and 7 nights into a big boat which was built under the care of a man called Moses, who we called the Good Shepherd, who sailed that boat into a promised land. Later, Maria and Joseph gave birth to Jesus. Is that all? That's as far as Holy Father Ramsay got. He tells Bitch Sunday. Aiza noticed with despair that he had forgotten about his hand and that the row had gone crooked again. He crawled back on his hands and knees to the point where the row went crooked. The young one followed him on the other side of the fence. Where is God? Everywhere, mostly inside there, Aiza indicated the church. What does he want? The old man thought about this for a time. For people to be good, you know, to stop stealing and killing and robbing. Why does he want that? Because it's a sin. What's the sin? Robbing, stealing and killing. What happens if you do that? Q, Lord Jesus cries, will punish you. You done those things? What do you mean punish? Give you hell? Kill you? Maybe. The young man went away after that, and Aiza thought he was gone for good, but he came back a few minutes later. When do they sing again? Tonight. I ring the bell tonight at 10 minutes before 7. Why don't you come? Me? Come, man, and join in the singing. Me! I'm telling you, anybody can come. It's the house of God. I ring his bell. Will you come? Yes. Listen tonight, you hear? Listen for me. I will call you to believe in God. His body felt unnaturally light. Walking was no longer the weight of his legs coming down on the hard, resistant earth, but a sensation of drifting, as if the shimmering noonday heat was running in the streets and carrying him along with it. A warm wind came scuffling down the corners with the clouds of dust. He had passed beyond even feeling the sting as the grains of sand whipped into his flesh. He only closed his eyes, but not tightly, just dropped the lids, and then the wind passed right through him, blowing away his thoughts before he had time to recognize them. The illusion of moving without touching the ground was even greater than he had opened his eyes again. The buoyancy was spreading beyond himself. There was no longer any weight to the baby he was carrying, wrapped up in his coat. Other people crossed his range of vision in a seemingly effortless motion. Looking up, he thought he saw rooftops lifting off the walls and drifting away into the white sky. Another wind swept through him, and he closed his eyes. Miriam the genie was on her knees behind the large zinc washtub when she saw him coming down the street. For the few seconds that it took him to reach the gate, she stopped her washing and waited, resting on her outstretched arms, which were neither up to their elbows in the bluish-grey water. When Tsotsi walked into the yard, she got to her feet and flicked the soap suds off her arms. She knew that he carried wrapped up in his coat. The baby? Tsotsi nodded. Miriam turned away and he followed her into the room where she took the baby out of his coat and put it down on the bed. What's wrong? He wasn't hungry. That's not so, Miriam protested. He's more hungry than my Simon. Babies need milk. Did you give him the milk in the bottle? Tsotsi had sat down on a chair. Yes, to his own ears his voice seemed to come floating from a long distance away. I gave it to him. He threw it up. He remembered now and looked at his hands. The clotted milk had dried on his hands in white, flaky streaks. He started rubbing it off. The bed springs creaked behind him as Miriam sat down beside the baby and began to work. Tsotsi turned and watched her. She knew exactly what to do. It was an all-enveloping satisfaction to watch her and the firm, assured movements of her hands. Have you got any money? Money? Boston, sour milk and bread. No money. He heard the chink of coins in a cup, and then her bare feet on the floor as she crossed the room. She was gone for about 10 minutes. In that time he looked out of the door and at the tub of washing with which she had been busy when he arrived. Beside it was a bucket piled high with twisted rolls of the washing she had already rinsed out. The thought of the cool water in the tub, of wetness against the skin, of something gurgling thirstily down the throat tormented him. Tsotsi found a bucket of water in a corner and a mug beside it. He took a deep drink and then went back to his chair. Miriam returned with a small bottle. At the table where he sat, she measured out a few tablespoons of a dark brown liquid in a cup and then stirred in a little water. Medicine. For the stomach. She fed it to the baby in spoonfuls, and after that she gave him a feeding bottle full of milk. A man doesn't know, she said. About babies, there are things a man doesn't know and can't do. She paused and looked at Tsotsi carefully. What is the matter with you? Nothing. Your eyes. He waited for her to finish. You look tired. He shrugged his shoulders. She dropped her eyes to her hand for a few seconds, then looked up suddenly. Have you eaten? I've got some bread here. He didn't wait. Miriam didn't wait for an answer. Tsotsi took one of the slices smeared with dripping that she put down before him. After that she went and checked up on the baby. He was still drinking. Miriam sat down beside him on the bed and spoke from there. When I first saw this little one, this baby David, I knew what you wanted from me. It was worse than if... Tsotsi was listening to her carefully. You know, she asked. I know. It was worse than that, because I got a man. My Simon's got a father, only we don't know where he is. My husband, Simon's father. His name was Simon too, and I've been looking for him. For a long time I've been looking. But he's just gone. So instead I find this little baby David one day in your room, and when I knew what you wanted, you know what I thought. But what I want to say is this. I was wrong. Milk goes sour, you know. Mother's milk goes sour too. Mine was. In me. In my tits. It was going sour with all the keeping of it, because Simon's taking food now, and I got more than I need. You understand what I'm saying? Tsotsi nodded. So it was wrong to keep it, you see. I mean, I want to keep it, because you can't, can you? You can't keep everything without going sour. That is how it was with me, and that is what this little David taught me. You see. Miriam closed her eyes and sighed with her hands clasped in her lap, rocked silently on the bed for a few moments before continuing. You see, I don't think Simon is coming back. I think my man is dead. It was out. I think he's dead and buried somewhere. Out at last, in a sudden surge of almost masochistic courage, she forced herself to say it again. I'm thinking these days that it's almost sure he's dead. Simon is dead. She opened her eyes and found Tsotsi staring at her. Dead. Simon is dead. Miriam looked down at the baby beside her. He'd finished his milk, so she picked him up and rocked him on her knees and rubbed his back. And after he'd broken a few winds, she put him down again and he went to sleep. None of this interrupted her chain of thought. She picked up where she had left off. So Simon is dead, but I got my baby and there's little David too. It's hard times, but I'm doing washing and my brother gives me something each week and I manage. Miriam stood at the door, looking out into the yard. I mean, we got to live. Little David, he's got to live. Anyway, Simon must, and me too. Even you. We just got to live. Isn't that so? That's what it is. That's all that it is. Tomorrow comes and you got to live. Tomorrow comes, Tsotsi thought, and a little boy has got no father and his mother never came back. And anyway, he didn't remember. But tomorrow taught him that he had to live. She was right. Miriam hesitated for a few seconds at the doorway. When she spoke again, her voice was calm and the emotion that had been trembling under it had passed. You are tired. You can rest here if you want to. She went into the yard and down on her knees, and the heavy silence was broken by the splash and slap of her labours at the tub. There wasn't much left to be washed, and when the last had been rinsed out, she dragged the bath to one side and began hanging up the washing to dry. Miriam shook out each piece of washing before draping it over a line. The whiteness leapt and dazzled in the sunlight. The wind trailed endlessly through them, and they billowed out and fluttered as brave as flags. Soon there wasn't a square inch of the yard that wasn't covered with the restless whiteness. Miriam moved through it all, bent low at the waist like someone struggling through a snowstorm. One shirt in particular held his eyes, the sleeves swinging uselessly at the sides, the collar fallen forward as if the man who had worn it had been decapitated. Soon Miriam was clearing the line and then turned and came towards the room with her arm piled high with the dry washing. Tsotsi went to the bed and looked down. His baby was awake, but lying quite still. He felt Miriam come up behind him. You want to take him. Please don't. Why not? Not ever. Please. Is there water? She gave him a mug. When will you be back? Some time. Where are you going? Ding dong ong ong. Ding dong ong ong. Tsotsi did not yet trust her sufficiently to leave the baby in her care. By nightfall he had returned the baby to the ruins. He woke up late the next morning. He had slept long. The sun had cleared the rooftops and was already hot. It was a new day, and what he had thought out last night was still there inside him. Only one thing was important to him now. Come back, the woman had said. Come back, Tsotsi. I must correct her, he thought. My name is David Madondo. He said it aloud. in the almost empty street and laughed. The man delivering milk heard him, looking up and said, "Peace, my brother, peace be with you." David Madondo replied and carried on his way. He heard the bulldozers and saw the dust a long way away. It was a strange noise, and he had been hearing it for a long time. When he turned the corner and saw them, he stopped and stared. The slum clearance had entered a second and decisive stage. The white township had grown impatient. The ruins, they said, were being built up again, and as many were still coming in as they carried off in the lorries to the new locations or in the vans to the jails. So they had sent in the bulldozers to raise the buildings completely to the ground. He started running from the bottom of the street, and halfway up he started shouting, "No, stop, stop it!" People stopped and watched him pass, and because of the look in his eyes turned and followed him. A few cried stop with him, but not knowing why. He jumped through the ruins, leaving the others behind because they weren't going in there, and because of the noise and the dust. Those who were inside waiting with sledgehammers behind the bulldozer, they did not hear or see him. They were watching the wall, and it was with something like sadness that they all remembered Marabatswe. He got there with seconds to spare. He had enough time to dive for the corner where the baby was hidden, before the first crack snaked along the wall and the topmost bricks came falling down, time enough even then to look and then finally to remember. Then it was too late for anything, and the wall came down on top of him, flattening him to the dust. They unearthed him minutes later. All agreed that his smile was beautiful and strange for a Tsotsi, and that when he lay there on his back in the sun after someone had fetched a blanket, they agreed that it was hard to believe what the back of his head looked like when you saw the smile.